Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. We are reading from Canto 1, Chapter 9, and we have read up to verses 7 so far. We'll be reading from Chapter 8, verse 8 now. Ukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yat kripatam vande Shri Gundin Tarinam Paramanand Madhavam Shri Chaitanyeshwaram Hariyam Tatsal. I'm only reading the translation and the purports, not reading the shlokas this time. And many others like Shukadev Goswami and other purified souls, Kashyap and Angiras and others, all accompanied by the respective disciples, arrived there. Shukadev Goswami says, the famous son and disciple of Shri Vyasadeva, who taught him first the Mahabharata and then Srimad Bhagavatam, Shukadev Goswami recited 1,400,000 verses of the Mahabharata in the councils of the Gandharvas, Yakshas and Rakshasas, and he recited Srimad Bhagavatam for the first time in the presence of Maharaj Parikshit. He thoroughly studied all the Vedic literatures from his great father. Thus, he was a completely purified soul by the dint of his extensive knowledge in the principles of religion. From Mahabharata Sabha Parva 4.11, it is understood that he was also present in the royal assembly of Maharaj Yudhishthir and at the fasting of Maharaj Parikshit. As a bona fide disciple of Sri Vyasadeva, he inquired from his father very extensively about religious principles and spiritual values, and his great father also satisfied him by teaching him the yoga system by which one can attain the spiritual kingdom. The difference between fruitive work and the empiric knowledge, the ways and means of attaining spiritual realizations, the four ashrams, namely the student life, the householder's life, the retired life, and the renounced life, the sublime position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the process of seeing Him face to face, the bona fide candidate for receiving knowledge, the consideration of the five elements, the unique position of the intelligence, the consciousness of the material nature and the living entity, the symptoms of the self-realized soul, the working principles of the material body, the symptoms of the influential modes of nature, the trees of perpetual desire and psychic activities. Sometimes he went to the sun planet with the permission of his father and Naradji. Descriptions of his travel in space are given in the Shanti Parv of the Mahabharata 332. At last he attained the transcendental realm. He is known by different names like Aranaya, Arunisutta, Vyasaki and Vyasatmaja. Kashyap, one of the Prajapatis of the son of Marichi and one of the sons-in-law of Prajapati Daksh, he is the father of gigantic bird Garuda, who was given the elephants and tortoises as eatables. He married 13 daughters of Prajapati Daksh, and their names are Aditi, Diti, Danu, Kastha, Arishta, Surasa, Ila, Muni, Krodha, Vasha, Tamra, Surabhi, Sarama, and Timi. He begot many children, both demigods and demons, by those wives. From his first wife Aditi, all the 12 Adityas were born. One of them is Vamana, the incarnation of God. This great sage Kashyap was also present at the time of Arjun's birth. He received a presentation of the whole world from Parshuram, and later on he asked Parshuram to go out of the world. His other name is Arishtanemi. He lives on the northern side of the universe. Angiras, he is the son of Maharshi Angira and is known as Brihaspati, the priest of the demigods. It is said that Dronacharya was his partial incarnation, Shukracharya was the spiritual master of the demons, and Brihaspati challenged him. His son Kacha and he delivered the fire weapon first to Bharadwaj Muni. He begot 6 sons like the fire god by his wife Chandramasi and one of the reputed stars. He could travel in space and therefore he could present himself Even in the planets of Brahmalok and Indralok, he advised the king of heaven, Indra, about conquering the demons. Once he cursed Indra, who thus had to become a hog on the earth and was unwilling to return to heaven. Such is the power of the attraction of the illusory energy. Even a hog does not wish to part with its earthly possessions in exchange for a heavenly kingdom. He was the religious preceptor of the natives of different planets. Chapter 9, verse 9 of Canto 1 now. Bhishmadeva, who was the best amongst the 8 Vasus, received and welcomed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly all the religious principles according to time and place. Expert religionists know perfectly well how to adjust religious principles in terms of time and place. All the great acharyas or religious preachers or reformers of the world executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in the terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world, and if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of the time and place. Bhishmadev was one of the 12 great authorities in preaching this cult of devotional service, and therefore he could receive and welcome all the powerful sages assembled there at his deathbed from all parts of the universe. He was certainly unable at the time to welcome and receive them physically, because he was neither at his home nor in a normal healthy condition, but he was quite fit by the activities of his sound mind, and therefore he could utter sweet words with hearty expressions, and all of them were well received. One can perform one's duty by physical work, by mind and by words, and he knew well how to utilize them in the proper place, and therefore there was no difficulty for him to receive them, although physically unfit. Chapter 9, verse 10. Lord Sri Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, yet he manifests his transcendental form by his internal potency. This very Lord was sitting before Bhishmadev, and since Bhishmadev knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. Purport. The Lord's omnipotency is displayed by his simultaneously presence in every place. He is present always in his eternal abode Golok Vrindavan, and still he is present in everyone's heart and even within every invisible atom. When he manifests his eternal transcendental form in the material world, he does so by his internal potency. The external potency or the material energy has nothing to do with his eternal form. All these truths were known to Sri Bhishmadev, who worshipped him accordingly. Verse 11. The sons of Maharaj Pandu were sitting silently nearby, overtaken with affection for their dying grandfather. Seeing this, Bhishmadev congratulated them with feeling that there were tears of ecstasy in his eyes, for he was overwhelmed by love and affection. Purport. When Maharaj Pandu died, his sons were all small children, and naturally they were all brought up under the affection of the elderly members of the royal family, specifically by Bhishmadev. Later on, when the Pandavas were grown up, they were cheated by cunning Duryodhan and company, and Bhishmadev, although he knew that Pandavas were innocent and were unnecessarily put into trouble, could not take the side of Pandavas for political reason. At the last stage of his life, when Bhishmadev saw his most exalted grandsons, headed by Maharaj Yudhishthir, sitting very gently at his side, the great warrior grandfather could not check his loving tears, which were automatically flowing from his eyes. He remembered the great tribulation suffered by the most pious grandsons. Certainly he was the most satisfied man because of Yudhishthir's being enthroned in place of Duryodhan, and thus he began to congratulate them. Verse 12 of chapter 9, Bhishmadev said, "Oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls suffer for being the sons of religion personified. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations, yet you were protected by the Brahmanas, God and religion." Purport. Maharaj Yudhishthir was disturbed due to the great massacre of the battle of Kurukshetra. Bhishmadev could understand this, and therefore he spoke first of the terrible sufferings of Maharaj Yudhishthir. He was put into difficulty by injustice only, and the battle of Kurukshetra was fought just to counteract this injustice. Therefore, he should not regret the great massacre. He wanted to point out particularly that there were always protected by the Brahmanas, the Lord, and religious principles. As long as they were protected by these three important items, there was no cause of disappointment. Thus, Bhishmadev encouraged Maharaj Yudhishthira to dissipate his despondency. As long as a person is fully in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and strictly following religious principles, one has no cause for despondency, however trying the circumstances of life. Bhishmadeva, as one of the authorities in line, wanted to impress this point upon the Pandavas. So this brings us to the end of today's reading of verses from first chapter 9 of Canto 1, the passing of Bhishmadev in presence of the Lord. Thank you for joining. I am Tatsat. Hare